Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the absolute most significant and, let's be real, polarizing shifts in modern Middle Eastern geopolitics. We're going to look way past the snappy headlines and the political rhetoric, and we're digging directly into the history to understand what actually happened. Let's just jump right in. Picture this. It's a pitch-dark night, a private jet with literally no logo, no registration, and absolutely no public record quietly lifts off from a hidden airport somewhere in the Gulf. Its destination? A quiet European city where a clandestine meeting is about to completely rewire the Middle East. On one side of the table, you've got the head of Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad. On the other, an Arab prince from a country that officially doesn't even recognize Israel's right to exist. And tucked away in the corner, a senior CIA official quietly watching over the whole thing. No cameras, no journalists, just high-stakes calculations and massive secrets. So these secret meetings went on for months. A massive geopolitical chessboard was being set up while the rest of the world had no idea. And then, bam, the curtain gets pulled back. Suddenly, the world is seeing smiling leaders, historic handshakes, and these grand declarations of peace, known as the Abraham Accords. But as you can imagine, it instantly sparked a huge debate. Was this sudden normalization a genuine breakthrough for peace in a historically volatile region? Or was it a highly calculated, super dangerous political gamble made at the expense of the Palestinians? Okay, Section 1, the historical paradigm shift. To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to establish the baseline by looking at decades of precedent. You see, since the creation of the State of Israel back in 1948, the Arab world largely viewed it as a symbol of Western intervention and really the direct cause of Palestinian displacement. For Palestinians, the events of 1948 are known as al-Nakba, or the catastrophe, which is when hundreds of thousands of people were displaced from their homes. And that event became the deeply entrenched root of a unified Arab hostility toward Israel. When we trace that timeline of conflict, it is pretty clear. You've got wars in 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973. Each one just deepened the divide. For years and years, the old rules of the region dictated a rock-solid, unified Arab stance, absolutely no normalization with Israel without the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. They even formalized this in 2002 with the Arab Peace Initiative. The rule was super simple: Palestine first, normalization second. But then, in 2020, that long-standing rule was completely shattered. Several Arab states normalized relations with Israel without any final resolution for the Palestinians. So you gotta ask, why the sudden shift? Well, that brings us to Section 2, hidden strategic motivations. Let's take a look behind the curtain. The Abraham Accords definitely weren't driven by just some sudden unified desire for peace. Actually, they were engineered from a really complex mix of immediate security fears and intense power struggles. It's literally the oldest rule in the geopolitical playbook: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. One of the biggest unseen forces pushing these nations together was a shared, growing anxiety over Iran. Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and other regional powers were all eyeing Iran's expanding influence, its missile programs, and its proxy networks. Aligning with Israel suddenly meant access to top-tier Israeli tech, closer ties to Washington, and a united front against Tehran. Now, what's genuinely fascinating about this transactional diplomacy is how specific it was. Everyone had a shopping list. The UAE, they wanted advanced American military tech, specifically those F-35 fighter jets. Bahrain wanted to lock in its alignment with broader Gulf security policies. Sudan was desperately looking for an exit strategy from crippling U.S. sanctions and economic isolation. And Morocco, they scored American recognition of their territorial claim over Western Sahara. It was basically a masterclass in overlapping interests. And, we absolutely can't ignore the domestic politics back home. These agreements served as massive, simultaneous victories for the leaders involved. For U.S. President Donald Trump, brokering this deal delivered a historic foreign policy win right in the middle of his 2020 election campaign. And for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it was a massive victory that reinforced his image as a global statesman who could expand Israel's acceptance, which gave him a crucial buffer against intense domestic pressure and corruption investigations. But moving to Section 3, reality on the ground. While these deals were celebrated in distant capitals, the consequences actually unfolded publicly, leading to what many call a shattered illusion. Because the reality was far more complicated than just a signature on a piece of paper. The divide in perspective was stark. On one hand, supporters immediately pointed to the pragmatic benefits. The Accords created a brand new security architecture and unlocked huge economic opportunities, trade, and tourism. But on the flip side, critics were sounding the alarm. They argued that by abandoning decades of solidarity and bypassing the Palestinians, the Accords were actually accelerating regional polarization. It was like building a house on a very unstable foundation. And tragically, that underlying instability violently erupted on October 7th, 2023. Hamas launched a deadly attack on Israel, which then sparked a massive and devastating military campaign by Israel in Gaza, resulting in profound destruction and a really severe humanitarian crisis. This war instantly intensified anger across the Arab and Muslim world. And it violently reignited that core debate. Had normalization actually brought peace, or had it simply ignored a powder keg until it finally exploded? And this brilliantly, if darkly, illustrates how the Middle East actually became increasingly divided. The agreements didn't stop further conflict. In many ways, things just escalated. We've seen a surge in cyber operations, expanding proxy conflicts, and unprecedented direct military confrontations between Israel and Iran. The region has fractured even deeper into rival blocs. Which brings us to our final section, the battlefield of tomorrow. We need to look at three major risks because the Middle East currently stands at a highly dangerous crossroads. The fragile balance between diplomacy and total escalation rests on three distinct paths that could shatter whatever stability is left: a nuclear arms race, the spread of indirect proxy warfare, and boiling domestic public pressure. So, scenario one is a regional nuclear arms race. If tensions with Iran keep escalating, and if Iran pushes closer to actual nuclear capability, the ripple effects are going to be immediate. Powerful neighbors like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt are not just going to sit by. They could very easily trigger a rapid and incredibly dangerous regional arms race to match Iran's capabilities. Then there's scenario two, proxy warfare. Regional powers might desperately want to avoid a direct state-on-state war, but they'll happily continue to fund and arm allied groups to fight their battles indirectly. This means devastating instability spreading like wildfire through proxy groups in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria, stretching all the way to the Red Sea and threatening global shipping lanes. And finally, scenario three, the boiling pressure from within. We really have to remember that while the government signed these accords, public opinion across the Arab world remains fiercely and overwhelmingly pro-Palestine. As conflicts like the war in Gaza continue, the Arab governments that normalize ties with Israel face intense, mounting domestic blowback. The future here might not be decided by kings or presidents, but by the sheer pressure of ordinary citizens. So the crucial point is this overarching lesson. The new Middle East that was promised back in 2020 hasn't truly emerged yet. Strategy, power, and transactional diplomacy can certainly create alliances and buy you some time. But true, lasting stability, that requires trust, it requires justice, and it requires the legitimacy of the public. We've looked at the hidden meetings, the strategic gains, the tragic realities on the ground, and the looming risks of tomorrow. The history is laid out right in front of you, so I leave you with this to analyze for yourself. When we look back at the geopolitics of the 21st century, will the Abraham Accords be remembered as a flawed but necessary step toward peace, or a historic mistake that set the stage for even greater conflict? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep